Hi, I'm Keith Farrow and welcome to another online tutorial. It's a recording and this one is about rodents. Now we're looking at the rodents that you will find the most of when you come into contact with them during your day-to-day pest control work. We're not looking at every rodent species, we're just looking at 3 different types of rodent. And I think it's important to remind you that rodents are mammals, and so when you're doing this work, anything that you feed the rodent in order to kill it, like a rodenticide, will not just work on the rodent, it will work on any other mammal, that is dogs, cats, people. So we have to be very careful when we're using rodenticides. So rodents are a real problem, and they are one of the few non-insect species that we're going to be dealing with. So let's have a look at the rodents. Now it's going to be a PowerPoint presentation. I'll talk your way through it, plenty of images and photographs. So give me a second and I'll get it up and running. It takes around 25 minutes or so. Okay, hang on a tick. Right, so let's get started. You follow the cursor around and I'll point to the bits and pieces that are important. Okay, let's get them moving. Rodents, identification of the rodent and some of its habits. So first off, there are only 3 rodent species that we really have to deal with in our day-to-day work. We have the roof rat, the Norway rat, and the house mouse. Now, oftentimes you will not see the rodent at all. You may see the mouse, but most oftentimes you won't see the rat. It'll be somewhere else or hiding away and you won't find it. Indeed, when you do find it, it's probably such a shock that you'll run the other way as well as the rat. You both scare each other to death. So, but you do need to be able to identify it. You might see it at a distance and you can identify them. So let's have a look firstly at the roof rat. The roof rat is quite a slender, delicate animal. It grows up to around 250 grams in weight, so significantly smaller than a fully grown Norway rat. But you get babies as well, so you get all sorts of sizes. So the roof rat, it's long and slender. The nose, as you can see here, is actually pointy, relatively pointy. The eyes are quite large and the ears are quite large as well. If we look at the feet, the toes of the roof rat are much longer than they are of the Norway rat. This is a roof rat. It's good at climbing and the toes are used a lot. Therefore, they're elongated to help with climbing. When we also go to the tail, and again, probably because it's a roof rat and it uses it partly for climbing, the tail is longer than the body, significantly longer than the body. So the roof rat, we have a pointy nose, large eyes, large ears, long toes, and a long tail. Everything about this rat is slender and pointy. Moving to the Norway rat, this rat will grow to around about up to a good size of up to 500 grams. So it can be twice as big, lumpy as the Norway rat, as the roof rat. Now this rat will climb, and it can climb, but it's nowhere near as good a climber as the Norway rat. So don't think that you'll never find this up high. They can climb, and they do, but they're just nowhere near as good or as agile up top as the roof rat. Now when we look at it, everything about this rat is kind of blunt. It's got a much rounded, more blunt nose. The eyes are much smaller, the ears smaller, the toes are not as large as that or long as those of the roof rat, and the tail is actually shorter than the body. So they're quite distinct between the 2 styles of rat. And if you see them, you should be able to distinguish the 2 if you get long enough time to look at it or come face to face with it. You'll actually see that the 2 are quite different. I'm not going into the colour. It's all about those things we just talked about. The sleekness of the rat, the pointy or non-pointy face, the large eyes or little eyes, the big or little ears, and the tail is really important. When this thing's running, you can see the tail and you'll know. And then the footprints, whether it's got longer toes or shorter ones, that will all come out in the evidence we look at for these rats. Now, looking at the mouse, really small. You're looking at a sort of 25 to 30 gram being here. It's kind of tiny. It's got really big eyes, really big ears, longish toes, longish tail, but it's small and they're kind of cute. So that's the mouse. The thing is, you'll possibly see the mouse, and other evidence will tell you that you're dealing with a mouse. So let's move on. We can now identify the rodent we're looking at. Let's look on the next bit. We need to be able to identify the rodent we're dealing with just from evidence which isn't the evidence of the rat or the mouse itself. What do they leave behind that will lead us to the opinion that we're dealing with a mouse or a rat, and whether it may or may not be a roof rat or a Norway rat? Let's have a look. First off, gnawing. Rats have to gnaw. Their teeth never stop growing, and they have to remain sharp. So the rats and the mice, rodents in general, will continue to gnaw throughout their life. If they don't, they will starve because, one, they won't have sharp teeth, and two, these teeth will grow and will grow into the base of the neck and stop them being able to feed. They won't be able to open their mouth big enough to get the teeth in and chew. So they gnaw continually. And there's a material at the back of the teeth that they wear away that keeps the tooth itself sharp. But you can, if you're seeing the gnaw marks, you can actually tell the difference between the rat and the mouse. If you've got gnawing on a soft material like a wax block or chocolate or something like that, the teeth marks or the gnaw marks for the rat are around about 2 millimetres in size. So the gnaw marks are about 2 millimetres wide, whereas if you look at the mouse, the gnaw marks are only small. They're only up to 1 millimetre wide, and they'll be parallel down the face of the thing that they're gnawing at. They'll certainly gnaw at timber, but it's difficult to see gnaw marks in timber. They'll gnaw at plaster, but it's difficult to see them in there. If they're gnawing at some soft material like a wax block or some chocolate or something like that, you can see the gnaw marks, and you'll be able to go, it's quite fat, therefore we're dealing with a rat, or it's quite skinny or slender, therefore we're dealing with a mouse. Gnaw marks can be used to help identify. Tracks are also around. Now, tracking is interesting. Rats are habitual animals, and once they've found a preferred place to travel to and from the area they're feeding, they will use it in a habitual manner. They will follow that track always, unless something disastrous happens, like the track's ripped up or something. They will continue moving along those areas, and you will see the feet prints or the footprints. And oftentimes, if it's a rat, you'll actually see a line in the footprint because it's the tail dragging along the ground as well. So have a look. If you're seeing these sorts of tracks, that is where the rat is moving backwards and forwards. And of course, that helps because where are you going to try and put the bait? Or if you're going to be using some sort of trapping device or like live traps or something like that, where are you going to put them? Where they're tracking. Yes. So finding out where they're tracking is important, and it will help you with identify it. The mice, they run all over the place. So if you see tracking that's all over the place, you're dealing with a mouse. And they'll be all quite self-contained. They won't be going over long distances at all. So tracking, it'll help. The droppings, you will see droppings with rats, and you can identify the animal from the droppings. So let's have a look at the mouse first. The droppings are quite small. You're talking only sort of, up to 5 mil, sort of at the very most with the droppings, and they can be confused with cockroach droppings. So be careful. But cockroach droppings are very, very, they're consistent sizes, and they're consistent in the droppings, whereas mouse droppings are inconsistent. They're all over the place. So they're wrinkly, and they're sharp and flat and blunt and all this sort of stuff. So they're not really consistent, whereas cockroach droppings are quite consistent, but they're small. If you look at the roof rat droppings are around about 12 mil. And it, like the rat, is slender, and it's pointy. So the roof rat, pointy nose, pointy tail, pointy toes. The droppings, pointy poo, pointy droppings. So have a look. You should be able to tell the difference between pointy droppings of the roof rat and the Norway rat, which gives you blunt droppings. Blunt nose, blunt tail, blunt ears, blunt droppings. Don't ask me why they're blunt and why they're pointy. Got no idea, but that's how it works. And the Norway rat, the droppings can be up to 18 millimetres long. So these can be quite big, chunky droppings. Okay, so that's an exciting subject, but you will find droppings always on a rodent job. So being able to identify them from the droppings is important. And you will also find the droppings with the rats will be along the tracking as well. So it's a double indication that this is where they're coming and going to and from. The next thing is along with the tracking, But this is a part of the tracking that will also help you identify the age of the infestation. Now, rats are habitual. They'll run backwards and forwards along the same lines and the same entry points time and time and time again. And the whole family can do it. They'll follow each other. And in doing so, they smear and leave oily trails behind them or where they're walking, a bit like you hanging onto a door. Over time, you'll get greasy marks on the door and you'll be able to see them. Well, this is what happens with rats. Now here we have tracking along a conduit and along a small slit, edging on a piece of timber on a wall. And you can see that the rat is moving along these things and moving around the joists here and along the wall and moving around these other bits of timber. And as they're doing so, they're leaving smear marks. Now, the more distinct and obvious the smear marks, the longer the infestation has been actually active at the site. The other thing you can do is find out if it's still active. Now, you should always carry a small penknife or probe or knife with you when you're doing the pest control, because this is where they come in handy. If you try and peel away that greasy rub mark, if it's dry and flaky, they haven't been using it at all for quite some time. If, however, it comes up and it's kind of still pliable and moist, they are still using it. So it tells you two things. Is it current or is it old? And if it's really distinct and it's very obvious, then it's probably been quite some time that they've had this infestation. And the problem is probably quite significant. So that will help. It gives you an indication that they're there and how frequent they're there and if it's current or not. Now, getting back to the droppings. How do you use the dropping to tell you how old the infestation is? Because that's important, and how big it is. So you're dealing with the rats, you're dealing with an animal that will poo about 40 to 50 times a day. So they do a lot of droppings, 40 to 50 a day per rat. So a couple of hundred droppings either means one rat for a few days or a really new infestation with a couple of rats. So hundreds of droppings are not unusual because they'll do 40 or 50 a day and over a long area. So you need thousands of these things before you start thinking we've got a significant and long-lasting problem or a problem that's been here for a long time. On the other hand, mice will drop 50 to 75 droppings a day. They will do a lot more droppings than the rat will, and they're close at hand. So if you're looking at 75, 100, 200 mouse droppings, you're just looking at a mouse that's been there a couple of days. If you're looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds into the thousands, you're looking at a mouse problem that's been there for a significant period of time, and they will all be really contained. So be aware you can get large amounts of droppings here. The other thing is that the droppings will also give you an indication what they've been eating. So you will find that once you've been baiting, if you're using green bait or blue bait or a red bait, that the droppings will actually come up coloured. So you'll know whether the droppings are from rats or mice that have been eating your bait. But be aware if they've been eating some coloured material as well, like pink or green or bright chartreuse, that colour will also come through in the droppings. So it gives you an indication what they've been eating and whether they've been eating your bait. So droppings, important. They can be used to tell you how big the infestation is. They can also be used to tell you how old the infestation is. Now, the old joke is that a soft poo or soft dropping is new and a crusty, hard dropping is old. And the way to tell it is just to bite it between your teeth. I wouldn't recommend that at all, but that's where your knife comes out. You can actually indent the dropping. If you touch it with the knife and it squishes and it's soft, it's a new one. If it cracks and it's old, it's an old one. And if you've got a range of new and old droppings, you've got an infestation that's been going on for some time. The other thing you will find is that it will help you then figure out, is it current, is it old, and how many rats there are, because you've now got new and old droppings. The other thing that the droppings will do is they age, they'll get a different colour. They'll go a lighter colour. They won't be that nice dark colour anymore. They'll sort of get greyish or something like that. Okay, so there's the droppings. It will tell you a fair bit. Now, what about the food? Rats and mice And the two rats and the mouse all eat different sorts of food. So the food that they're attacking will help you identify the rat and also help you with managing them as well. So let's look at the food. The rat will eat about 5 grams per 100 grams of body weight. So when we're talking about the roof rat, we're sort of talking around that, 5 grams times 2.5. We're talking about 15, perhaps 20 grams a day. When we're talking about the Norway rat, we're talking about 25, 30, 35 grams per day, so significantly more. But they eat a fair bit. And for water, the rats need water, and they will consume quite a bit of water. So we're talking about 50 to 75 mils in a day just for the water. So they do drink water. And that's important because you're trying to get them to feed on your bait. So the more food there is around, the less bait they're going to consume. The more water there is available, the more attractive the area is. So food and water are really important. With the mouse will only do 2 to 3 grams a day. It doesn't feed very much at all, and it has almost no water. 1.5 mils is all the mouse needs, and it can get that just from the food it eats. It doesn't have to go along looking for water. So removing the water source from a kitchen hopefully getting rid of the mice is not going to work. They get their water from the food predominantly. They don't go looking for it. Rats, however, need it, and they do drink a fair bit. So food and water is important, but no, the mouse doesn't eat very much. So let's have a look at a more visual example of what the food is that these guys are eating. The mice, they'll eat fruit, they eat vegetables, they'll eat seeds and grains, and they love carbohydrate. Love it. So that's the sort of thing they eat, carbohydrate, pasta, bread, cakes, that sort of stuff. So the mouse is quite a broad vegetarian sort of diet, and that's what it gets through. But remember, it's only eating small amounts of this. What about the Norway rat? Well, the Norway rat eats fruit, nuts and grains and cereals, but it also eats protein. So it will go for fish and meat as well. So that's the Norway rat. And what about the roof rat? Well, the roof rat's also almost all vegetarian as well. So it'll eat fruit, nuts, grains, cereals, that sort of stuff. It tends not to go for the high protein material. So just the diet of the rat and the mice, or what's being fed on by the rodent you're dealing with, will help you identify the rodent itself. Now, they do it differently. Rats and mice eat in a different way. Not so much how they eat, but how they go about doing their feeding. So on the left, what we've got is about that there's 30 grams there of red lentils. Now red lentils are really, really light. So that's 30 grams of red lentils. That's one piece of food for a rat. And on the right, we've got 5 grams of red lentils. I couldn't get any smaller than that. So that's 5 grams. So that's the mouse diet for the day. Considerably different. But how they consume their food is different as well. So let's look at what this means when the rat and the mouse eat. On the left, we have the rat. The rat, roof rat or Norway rat, will sit down and eat that whole package all by itself. That's it, bang. It'll just sit down and eat it. Now, coincidentally, a rodent bait is around about 25 grams, 25 to 30 grams. So the rat will sit down and eat one rodent bait at a sitting, and that's enough to kill it. It'll take 5 days, but it will die from just eating that one bait. So the thing there is, once it gets in and eats one whole rodent bait, you've done your job with that particular rat. It will eat more rodent bait, but that will be the following night, because the rat will sit down and eat one meal, just like you do. Sit down for dinner and you'll eat there. You won't go hunting around all over the place. The rat will sit down and eat it, if it gets the opportunity, all at once. The mouse, however, is different. On the right-hand side, we've got the number of times the mouse will go and try and nibble to get its 3 to 5 grams. And there we can see it goes, tens and tens of times. They can go along and feed at 30 plus different places in the one night in order to get a meal. So you can imagine how much they're eating at each place. Just tiny, weeny amounts of food, and then they scurry off and eat somewhere else. So a very different eating habit to the rat. Big deal. What does that mean? If you leave one mouse bait in a cupboard, It might eat it once a night and only take a really small amount. You are going to take a long time to get that mouse on the bait. You need multiple baits in the food regime for a mouse, and rats, you need to bulk them up a bit. So having all the bait stuck in one section for a mouse isn't going to mean that you're going to feed the mouse very much at all. It'll just take one bit and go off, whereas having multiple baits inside your bait station for rats can be quite important. So they're different. They have different feeding habits. Use that to your advantage. Water. I've told you about the water. There's the water for the rat. They use a fair bit of water. There's 30 mils there. There's 1.5 mils in the other one. So 30 mils on the left, 1.5 mils on the right. Rats need water. If you've got water lying around, it's conducive to rats. Get rid of it. The customer has to be involved. If you're doing the job, you need to remove the food, remove the water, reduce the conduciveness of the site, and almost force the rats to eat and the mice to eat your bait. Okay? Right, so that's the food and the drink. Let's look at a few other things now. How far will the rodents travel in order to get to the property that they're causing a problem with? Well, let's look at the rats first. For the rats, we have the Norway rat and the roof rat. Now, the Norway rat will tend to travel up to about 50 metres in order to get to the food source. Now, that doesn't mean it has to, but that means when you're looking for the Norway rat, it will be in that sort of 50-metre perimeter around the place that you're looking at being fed. So if it's a house, it needs to be coming in from next door. If it's a commercial site, depending on the commercial site, it could be actually already existing in the location, but just some way away. Remember I said that rats were habitual, and once they found a track that they liked, they'll continue to use it. Well, here on the left, you'll see a mark in the ground. And that's where the rat has used that track on backwards and forwards for a long period of time. And the family has done so, and they've worn a track in the grass. So the grass is not growing there anymore. A bit like a dog that runs round and round and round in circles inside the fence line of the yard, just wears the grass away. So these will give you an indication of where the rat may be coming from, roof rat or Norway rat. They both do the same thing. The Norway rat, however, not only can it live on site, but the Norway rat can come with relatively new research. They have been found to travel up 400 metres in order to get from their nesting site to the location that they're eating. So they can come an awful long way. So they may not be nesting or breeding in the location that you've got the problem in. They may be coming from somewhere away. Now that doesn't have to be the case. They can be actually living in the roof right above you. But they can also be coming from some distance away. So it's important when you're doing a rodent job or inspecting for rodents, don't just look at the area where they're having a problem. Look at where they may be coming from. Look at outside the building as well. Look for areas that may show you evidence of the rodent moving through the location and where they're coming from. And look for burrows. These rats, whether they roof rat or Norway rat, will actually burrow in the ground if they're outside nesting, and you'll find them. Have a look along concrete edges and round edges of buildings and that sort of thing, chook pens and that sort of stuff. That's where you'll find the rodent burrows from time to time. Righto, so that's the rats. What about the mouse? Totally different. The mouse will actually, it can actually live in the food. When you've done this a bit, when you've gone out and done a few mouse jobs, you'll find from time to time you'll pick up the dog biscuits, or you'll pick up the bird seed, or you'll pick up whatever it is else the mouse is feeding, and the nest is inside the packet. Yes, you'll jump, but you'll get used to it. You'll be a bit more cautious the second time you go in there and look for mice, because they run up your arm. So they will live inside the food if they've given the opportunity, or it's really quiet, or it's been stuck away in the back of a cupboard or down the bottom of the shed, and everyone's forgotten about it being there. They'll nest in it, and they'll eat it, and they use it for everything. So the mice will stay really close to the food source. They are going to be within 5 metres of the food source. So they may have their entire life cycle sitting inside the kitchen cupboard, or at least inside the kitchen. They may come in from outside the kitchen, but it won't be very far. They like to be close, and they don't go very far. Okay, so it's very different very different. You don't have to go hunting all over the place for mice. Yeah, they can be above or below the floor and that, but they won't be very far. But they will stay quite contained. And that's important because it helps you with your baiting again. Now, they've come to the house, but how did they get in? How did these things get in? They can't open the door. No. They'll come in under the crack in the door. They'll find holes in the walls. They can gnaw their way in if they particularly want to. But what allowed them in, and how big do these holes have to be? Well, you'll be surprised. They're not very big. So I call it the rule of thumb and the rule of little finger. The rat, no matter how big the rat is, if it can get its snout through the hole, the body can get in through that hole. So pretty much, if you can fit your thumb into the hole or into the gap under the door or into the nook or cranny that you're looking at and you're being suspicious about, the rat can get in. I don't care how big your thumb is. You shove the thumb into the hole and the rat can get into that hole, right? So that's pretty easy. The rule of thumb for the rat. For mice, it's the rule of little finger. If your little finger, and again, I don't care how your little finger is, big it is, if your little finger can get into the hole or the gap or the crack, then the mouse can use it as an entry or an exit point. Be careful shoving your fingers into little holes around the place, but that just gives you an idea. And it's not 100% accurate, but it gives you some sort of gauge when you're looking to go, yes, that needs to be sealed up, because proofing is a very important aspect in rodent control. And if you know what you're proofing, you know what to tell your customer when either they proof it or you're going to proof it, then it really, really helps. So the rule of thumb and the rule of little finger. You carry them around with you all the time. You don't need a tape measure, just your thumb and your little finger. Okay? So there we go. That's the end of the rodent session. And I hope you've gained something out of it. And if you've got questions, you can always contact us as usual. You've got phone numbers and email addresses. But that's it for rodent identification and some of the ways of identifying them without the rodent as well, and a little bit on some of their habits to help in managing rodents, because identification is important and hygiene, as you can see, is important. So thank you, and until next time, have a good one, and we'll catch you later. Cheers. Bye.